guest. She is fantastic. It is early in the morning for her. I always appreciate you getting up this early. Thank you for this, Sarah Bills. Sarah Bills is independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DDGO Politics. I was showing one of your articles earlier today. How are you doing today? You doing okay this morning?
Good. Excuse my appearance as usual, but I'm here and I've made it.
Your appearance is perfectly fine. You are always dazzling,
Thank you.
even when it's early in the morning. So don't be concerned. One of the things that you posted, I don't know if you specifically, but D&D, DD, geopolitics, was that there is a potential for a drawdown in Europe, that the U.S. was thinking about pulling 20,000 troops out of Europe, which goes in line with Donald Trump has been saying about cutting the military budget, having conversations with Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin. He seems to be putting it all on the table right here. This is the tweet. What's the reporting on this? It says U.S. may announce troop withdrawal from Europe at the Munich Security Conference. According to the Bild, Munich Security Conference Chairman Christoph Hegseth stated that J.D. Vance may announce a large-scale withdrawal of U.S. troops from Europe during the event. Go into this. Is this how accurate is this? How much legs does this have?
We still have a few more days for the security conference. So that could still be a possible announcement. Trump also announced his plans to, or his desires to, possibly denuclearize alongside Russia and China. So that would kind of also be in line with a troop drawdown. There's also been a ton of complaints, and I'm sure you know, especially recently, I woke up to another slew of them, is that nobody's pulling their weight. The Europeans aren't pulling their weight in terms of NATO. So this is also kind of a retaliatory measure to that. So there's a lot of different things going on. People are taking a really close look at the NATO spending today, which I find hilarious because all of the NATO spending comes to us anyway. So it doesn't really.
Well, that's the rub, right? If you think of Europe, God, man, they're a bunch of idiots. If you really think about it, we have fleeced the hell out of Europe. And so on so many levels. So you get involved in a war. We've hated the pipeline, Nord Stream, for God knows how long. We wanted to get rid of it. And just lo and behold, the pipeline gets blown up. Europe ends up spending 5 times more on U.S. LNG, the amount of that they're effectively paying out. We've got them to spend $200 billion on weapons. 70% of that, give or take, comes to us because they're buying the weapons from us. So you're in a situation where not only is the European economy getting weaker because of this stuff, because of the energy costs and everything else. You have companies that are leaving Europe coming to the U.S. You have all of this money fleeing Europe coming to the U.S. for the weapon sales. And you have all of this money coming to the U.S. for the amount that they're now paying for energy. And these idiots don't see it. And they're shocked that the right in Europe is gaining more prominence when they're saying stuff like, my ex-girlfriend hit me up yesterday. She's Austrian. And the right wing is going to win in Austria. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe these lunatics are going to win. And as I pointed to her, I was like, dude, the liberals in Europe are idiots. And they've effectively sold Europe out. And so, these people may be lunatics. There's an argument about the schnitzel saying that the Muslims are going to take their schnitzels away. It's these people are lunatics. But these lunatics also say stuff like, hey, why are we spending this much money on weapons? How is the U.S. screwing us over? Maybe we should have a foreign policy that, takes our own interests into account. Meaning the same people that are arguing that Muslims are coming after schnitzel are the same people that just so happen to point out to maybe we're being taken advantage of.
Coming after schnitzel is going to be that's going to be my new thing. They're coming to get our schnitzel.
They're coming to get our schnitzel. She said they did a 10-minute press conference about It's outrageous, just insane. But my point to her was if you have the Marie Le Pens of the world, if you have the AFDs of the world that just so happen to be pointing out, we should be neutral. We should work with countries that are in our interests. We don't want to be paying all this money for gas. We think America's taking advantage. When you get that coming out, people are going to focus on that because it's true. Europe is getting fleeced and they don't seem to realize it. And now America's like, all right, time to call it a day. You deal with European issues. We're going to deal with China. Have a good day.
Mm. We've been actually looking closer at kind of like why this sort of swing to populism and national. I mean, we know why, but I'm trying to get people to understand what liberalism does and why the pendulum swings the other way. And it's really even evident in the things that we've already discussed. The NATO thing, the weapon sales. It's the desire for America to kind of dilute this national identity and make them just all under one umbrella. That was the idea of the EU. That was the idea of NATO. It's these liberal institutions that are supposed to quell the state anarchy that is inherent in states. But what it wound up doing was to make an uneven power balance to the United States, which is just an advantageous position that they gave themselves after World War II. So this is quite natural. I know people pretend to be surprised, but I'm not sure how they really could in an economic downturn with a over hyper liberalized world government that is undermining and subverting national identity and history even. So I'm not shocked about Austria is also really based, so I'm not shocked that they're kind of swinging back the other way. Germany, we have their elections coming up soon, so yeah. And what's interesting is that the new thing is that 2020 Ukraine's spending on weapons went through the ceiling. That's because they were buying them from us to get ready for the war. But the Ukrainians look, we were the ones who actually spent the 4%. I'm like, that was our money. You gave our money back to us.
Yeah, pretty much. So because we were giving them the billions. Yeah. Trump has the call with Putin. Both sides seem to be ebullient over it. I mean, maybe there's another word for it, but they said it's a pleasant call. It lasts for hours or lasts for an hour and a half. They talked about everything from Ukraine to AI to money, all of this stuff. Zelensky apparently gets notice that the call took place. He comes out and he says this was not a pleasant experience to find out that Donald Trump talked to Putin before talking to Zelensky. He says Zelensky insisted that Kiev must be included in any negotiations. Quote, "We will not accept any bilateral negotiations without Ukraine, without us," he stressed. He's described his conversation with Donald Trump as being good, lasting almost an hour, but reiterated that it was not pleasant that Putin was contacted first. Europe is coming up with this refrain, or the Brits anyway, that America is betraying Ukraine. Is that true? Give me your take on this. I mean,
I think that America has been the most loyal to Ukraine through America and the UK. The UK too, it's very much to its own detriment. Mm-hmm. But America has, I think that we've done it enough. There's no betrayal. There were requests made, there were favors done, or there was support given, and you have to. I do not like Pete Hegseth, but I do like what he said, which was it's time to have some actual realism. It's time to be realist about what's happening here. And he said in so many words was basically you've lost, and now we have to negotiate from that position. So there is no betrayal. This is the end of the road. I think that if the United States kept going with this, it would be to its own detriment while we'd be able to absorb those sort of hits better than the UK. I think that it would really start to be to our detriment. And I think that Trump and Hegseth and Vance and the whole administration recognized the war fatigue that Americans have for this war and understood that if he kept it going at the same pace, that his popularity would decline most likely.
Yeah. So this is Hegseth. As you point out, effectively telling Europe, you guys have been living in a fantasy land and it is time to come to Jesus. I mean, he literally said the realism has not been part of the conflict. And he's absolutely right.
To allow or not allow is at the purview of the leader of the free world, of President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do, what will be in or what will be out, what concessions will be made or what concessions are not made. I can look, as our team has, of what's realistic, likely on an outcome. I think realism is an important part of the conversation that hasn't existed enough inside conversations amongst friends, but simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin. It's a recognition of hard power realities on the ground after a lot of investment and sacrifice, first by the Ukrainians and then by allies, and then a realization that a negotiated peace is going to be some sort of demarcation that neither side.
You know, what's wild about that too, Hegseth pointed out, there it is. Hegseth even pointed out virtue signaling is not the same thing as hard power. No. That all the virtue signaling in the world is not going to change reality on the ground that they are confronting. And he is right. And he is right. And how do you think Europe is going to absorb this? Because they seem to be all chaotic. I think it's Mark Rutte. He came out and recently pointed out, yeah, NATO membership was never a necessity in any negotiation to end the war. Okay, well, that's a big change. Since up to this point, he was the same guy who said that all of these countries need to cut their social benefits to pay 5% into NATO. Do you think they're even going to be able to do that 5%? Or is this a plan for Trump to undercut NATO in its entirety?
I don't know that it's a plan for Trump to do that. I don't know if that's the foresight in this. Mm-hmm. But I do see that NATO either needs to be completely revamped and rehauled, or it needs to go away. Germany can't survive this GDP increase. They're losing their entire automotive industry. The only people that are propped up by this are the Poles and the Baltics. Everybody else struggles to meet these requirements. They don't see them as necessary. So I don't know if it's Trump's plan to get rid of NATO. I don't know if that's one of his items, but I think that it might be a side effect of all of this, especially with Germany. Germany is, every German that I've spoken to has absolutely had enough of this. They've been ruined by the Ukrainian war.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of my point with this kind of leaning to the right, because it seems that the liberals are the ones that want to maintain this kind of forever war, whereas the right in these countries, whether it's Le Pen, whether it's Viktor Orban, whether it's, well, Fico is supposed to be on the left, but he's into that thing of this war needs to stop. The AFD, Alternative for Deutschland, like all of these right-wing groups are the ones that seem to be coming to the conclusion of a Trumpist point of view in their own countries about this conflict and about the wars. It's fascinating. I've never seen anything like it, where there's this kind of weird shift. I mean, even when you're going for Karl Kwiatkowski, for example, Romania, even he's skeptical of the war. And so I don't know. It's wild to me. It's just Trump saying, okay, now you need to pay 5% when they weren't even paying 2%.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, if they can't do that, and if Trump's threat is effectively Europe is going to deal with Europe. Hey, again, another comment by Hegseth, the United States needs to prioritize its own security, and it defines that in the Indo-Pacific. Effectively, our issue is with China, not with Russia. And so we need to mend fences with Russia and let Europe deal with Europe. Like, he is being very clear that this idea of the United States prioritizing Europe is over.
I hate this idea. I really do. I think that it's really leaving Europe out to dry. They've set up their economy. We've set up their economies to almost facilitate these sort of weapons buys and for them to be more dependent on us. I mean, we talked about in the beginning of the episode, liberalism literally wants to create interdependency, but really it only creates a dependency on the hegemon. So it's by design. So do they understand the spider webs and everything that they're kind of going to have to untangle in order for that to even be a thing, in order for them to switch the priorities? If Europe crumbles, I mean, there's not the threat of it falling to the horde of Russians, but there's a threat to it falling to hordes from not hordes. I hate that word, but there's a threat.
Well, because that's what they used to always say for the Soviet Union. That the hordes of Soviets, of people in these red coats and boots.
There's a threat to it in falling into a good amount of chaos just due to the refugees from Ukraine and other parts of the world. I mean, it already is. So I think that they're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. It needs a wind down. It can't just be this is where we're at. We're kind of dipping out. Sorry, guys. I know you didn't realize that the new administration would completely cut it off, but we're out of this. And that's not really fair to do to Europe. I don't think.
Really? Oh, we so disagree. We so disagree on this.
I have a soft spot for Europe. I think because I know that they're stupid and they kind of got caught up in this, and they kind of deserve it in a way. But at the end of the day, when you look at the results of this war and how it's really going to fall out, is it really that different from World War I and World War II?
But they had countries like Estonia, Lithuania.
They don't
Britain.
count. They're not countries.
These villages. These guys have been out there shaking their fists at Russia. It's almost like, you get into a fight with somebody, but your big brother is always going to be there. And so they're far more willing to shake their fists at a competitor that they could not win, could not beat, and would be very loud about it. And so it's like you've allowed yourselves to be vassals. You've allowed the U.S. to effectively blow up a pipeline. You've allowed a lie, this notion of an unprovoked aggression, at the expense of your own populations. And so it's like, okay, well, but it's like you did this to yourself. Why on earth would you allow the United States to have that much to be able to Bigfoot your countries to its own detriments? And as you pointed out, the German auto industry taking a hit, industries in Europe in general taking a hit because of the cost of energy that they themselves allowed by passing sanctions. Like there was not an honest actor in Europe looking and saying, hey, if we expand NATO to the border of Russia, they may feel some kind of way about that. Meaning they've been fundamentally dishonest all the way through this, and with the U.S. backing in their dishonesty. And so, yeah, I like Europe. I like the food in Rome. I like, sausage in Germany. By the same token, though, they have screwed over their countries. And so I'm a hard ass on this one. I think I'm more of a hard ass on this one.
That's weird because I'm the opposite. I should be a hard ass, and I find myself kind of being like, what are we? I guess maybe because I don't take this the wrong way. For me, it's kind of like I am European. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's some weird attachment for me growing up with my European family is like, so it's like, am I going to lose my, there's a little bit of that. But I also wonder how much of the leading down the, what is it, leading you
the Primrose Path.
Primrose Path.
Yeah.
I was going to say Briar Rose. Primrose Path, yeah. How much of it was the USA doing that with Europe? I mean, now that we're seeing USAID close down, we're realizing that most Europe countries didn't even have control of their own media. We did. So,
National Endowment for Democracy also. Apparently Trump has just put a knife in that one too.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I fair enough. Maybe we've been too much of a hard ass. You're right. We did lead them down that path on some level. I just have this thing where I hate it when a world leader is elected to a country. They have philosophical, legal, ethical responsibilities to the country, and they blow it off for another country. Whether that's with Zelensky, whether that's with Germany, whether that's with France, I hate it. I just hate it. I just find it to be a betrayal. Do you think we're reaching a new norm? Like that the orthodoxy of the U.S. under Trump, or Trump is changing the orthodoxy of the U.S. Yes, Democrats still believe in forever wars. They hate everything that Donald Trump is doing with USAID and NED, which is, again, astonishing considering that Democrats used to be the party of anti-war. Do you think this is a new norm, that Trump is changing orthodoxy in the way that we're pivoting in the world, and that this is going to last beyond Trump? Or is this a flash in the pan from your take?
I actually think it will last beyond Trump, especially some of the more isolationist policies. I think that's been something for a long time that Americans have had an issue with, this whole, why aren't we fixing our own problems? So I think that that's something that will become either will be just diminished a little bit or will stay stationary. I also think that looking at the liberals, the Democrats in the United States, they're going to lose 2028 as well. They have no idea what they did wrong, and they're just doubling down on whatever it was. So this may be, and they're talking about Vance 2028 on the right. So we're probably looking at a long time for them to kind of put these sorts of things in place. And I do see that Trump, I don't want to give him more credit than he deserves, but it's this sort of Teddy Roosevelt, non-interventionist, but showing off that sort of big stick. Walk softly, but carry a big stick. We're powerful. We don't need to intervene in everything. We just need to show people that we're powerful, sort of idea.
One of the things that Donald Trump has said too that has blown me away, if he can do it, is he wants to have conversations with Xi Jinping and Putin with the idea of cutting the military budget, basically slashing the U.S. military budget. Now, we pay nearly $1 trillion a year in our military. A lot of the stuff is in the black. We can't pass an audit to save our life, despite spending $1 trillion. So you know that money is just being thrown out of helicopters in this. We don't even know if the return on investment for the money that we spend. It's so much money. Trump, shockingly, again, I've never heard a president say anything like this, comes out and says this.
The first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
Elon Musk identified.
One of the first meetings.
Trump wants to cut the military budget in half. This has been something that lefties have wanted forever. And a Republican president stands up and says it. Give me your take on this. A, do you think he's serious? B, do you think he can do it? And C, do you think Russia and China will be interested in doing so?
C, no. Especially China. China is going to draw up in nuclear arms to catch up. People need to not look at this as Trump's trying to cut spending. Oh, yeah, that's part of it, because our spending in relatively speaking to Russia and China is astronomical. So our spending to maintain these nukes, to keep them up to date, to make more is exponentially greater than both Russia and China. We cannot keep up with China's nuclear production. Russia, we can't keep up with their artillery, and we still don't have as many nukes as them, especially serviceable nukes. So this isn't just about let's do the right thing for the American people. This is about we're going to have to expend a large amount of funds even just to catch up with Russia and China in the nuclear war. This is something that has happened before in the past. I think it was after World War I or II. They had a draw. No, I think it was one. They had a drawdown of weapons kind of across the superpowers. This is that sort of same idea where everybody proportionately kind of draws down. And so the hegemon remains the hegemon, but everybody at the same time draws down to a certain point. That's not something that the other superpowers need to do anymore. Why would they listen to Trump when he says, let's draw down our nukes while China's in a buildup phase? So it's more indicative of we can't keep up than it is, out of the goodness of our hearts, or maybe because we care about Americans, we should draw down this military spending. It's because we can't keep up.
And to point out, Russia only spends $80 billion a year on their military, like even during the war. China, I think, is at $200 billion. The US is at $1 trillion. So it's like if we're talking about spending less and cutting the military budget in half, okay, it's $500 billion if he cuts it in half. Russia's only at $80 billion. Like, so I don't know how that works. Like it's not them that needs to cut their budget. We need to cut our budget. They're not, like, Russia's not spending money hand over fist on their military in the way that we are. China is not even doing that. China has 1.2 billion people, and they still don't spend the money that we're spending on it. And so maybe he's talking specifically about missiles. Maybe I agree with you. I don't think they're going to do it. I get the sense. Look, even if we cut our budget in half, we're still twice as much as China. And still, even if you combine China, Russia, our enemies, we're still more than them, even if you cut our budget in half. So I applaud him for it. It's realistic. Even in the way that you frame it, it's a level of realism that Joe Biden didn't have. Like, because if you remember, Joe Biden was pointing out that the United States has threats now, especially if you combine Russia and China, that are overwhelming. If Trump is looking at that and looking at it in the same light, this is at the very least a realistic take of, we can't keep doing this. This has to stop. We need to put limits on this. We need to draw down. We're not even in a war, and we're spending $1 trillion a year. This makes no sense. You might be right in your framing of this and the way that he's looking at this. I'm just shocked that he said it. I'm just, I've never heard an American president broach anything other than the military budget going up. And he's like, we need to cut it. It needs to go down. It's just shocking. That's all. Give me your take on Trump so far in the moves that he's been making. And again, this is not pro-Trump. I just want to be very clear. Just not pro-Trump.
I want to stress to the viewers that I'm not pro-Trump at all. I'm not pro any U.S. government. So, but there's good and bad. I think that people are getting caught up in the glitz and the big changes or the big words, and they're missing a lot of what's really going on, which is a very technocratic takeover. There's almost a technocratic coup happening in the government. I hate to use that word because it makes it sound like, very violent, but it's not violent. It's quiet. They're getting rid of the regulatory bodies that regulate industries that, guess what, Elon's a part of. Oh, wow. Why have that happen? These things that people are getting excited over, Doge, which is very exciting. And I agree. The saddest part is as well as I, it's like you could have found all this out on your own for years if you just looked. It shouldn't like, if Elon Musk never came along, we would never know this stuff. It's like you could have just Googled it. It's been there the whole time. That's the thing, is we could have found out all this time. Now we're going to tuck it under the State Department. Now we'll never know what they're doing. What about the CFBP, the Consumer Fraud and whatever it is, protection?
Wait. Just so we're clear, I want the audience to understand what you mean by that. USAID or NED is being tucked under State Department as opposed to being the thing to its own. Rubio's argument was that this should follow U.S. policy, not just randomly knocking over governments. It should be knocking over governments that we want to knock over.
Right, exactly that.
Arbitrary, yeah.
Exactly that. And people leave that part out. Well, he leaves it out on purpose, but people don't make that connection. They're like, oh, this is great. It's our team now. They're going to have it. They're saying right to us is that the spending got out of control because it wasn't under our thumb. We couldn't keep an eye on what they were doing totally because it just kind of ballooned and got bigger than itself. And we're going to reel that back in and put it under the State Department. The funniest thing about this is it was under the State Department. It was the CIA. So it's like, the CIA isn't under State Department, but it was under a government authority. It was moved because it's illegal to do these things. That's a government authority is made into an NGO. People under what the USAID is supposed to feed policy or funding, and the CIA is supposed to feed policy into the NED, but the USAID was kind of dictating that policy because the CIA was kind of MIA. So that's the problem. The problem isn't that we were spending or that USAID is ran by liberals. The problem is that we weren't getting to dictate where the money was going, and we couldn't see who we were cooing. Marco Rubio wants to coup all of Latin America. USAID is mainly focused in Eurasia. So this is just a shift of interest. That's all. It was more like, we got to get a control over this thing because we need it, but it's just not working the way that we need it to. But I do think that parts of it are good as well. But again, people keep getting caught up in the glitz and the glam. The deportation. Obama deported more people than Trump. So why are people like, Trump's finally deporting? It's like, he's still not even at the halfway point of Obama's daily average. Yeah. People are kind of getting caught up in the excitement of it all and like not kind of allowing the dust to settle and examine it. Just like the question you asked me about the military spending. I'm sure people are ecstatic to hear that. But what they don't hear is the fact that we're saying that because we can't keep up.
Right. It's not out of the kindness of his heart. It's out of practical realities, which
I accept. Oh, sorry. I don't like to do the whole it's fascism, because I don't mean it in that weird way that people say it all the time. But this is very much techno-fascism. It's something that we haven't seen before. The tech companies are coming in and taking over a lot of regulatory bodies and a lot of government organizations. So it's really interesting. And he's kind of handing these regulatory bodies over to the technocrats, who then will get to dictate how their fields or their that is regulated. So that's the part that's scary. And I don't think that people understand because they're caught up in, oh, Elon's so based, or, oh, Elon writes funny memes on Twitter. And it's like, you don't have any clue what's actually going on. These people have their own set of interests. It's mostly in Latin America and natural resources. and they're just moving USAID somewhere else. So they want the government funding. They want more government funding to come to them. That's what they want.
And he's doing so much that it's hard to keep track.
Yes.
Like the firing, the federal workers, the going, it's all over the place. It's everything. In what, it's wild. In one sense, I would love a president to do this if they were following my priorities. If that makes sense. Like the notion that the president comes in, he's like, on day one, I'm going to sit here for 8 hours and sign executive orders. I don't know how long Trump was sitting there signing executive orders, but it seemed like it was forever. He was just one after the next, after the next, after the next. And it shows this kind of proof of concept that you can actually have an activist president. I just wish it was an activist president doing stuff that I thought was best. He is doing a lot. I mean, the firing of the workers. And then there's a question of, okay, what is the budget going to look like? They're trying to pass a budget for the first time in God knows how long. Will Medicaid be on the chopping block? Social Security and Medicare seem to be protected because Trump lives in Florida. But Medicaid definitely seems to be a potential target. And when you go to Democrats, and I'm glad you brought up Democrats seemingly out to lunch. Jon Stewart had a conversation with Hakeem Jeffries, the House House of Representatives lead for Democrats. Jon Stewart asked him a very good question. Effectively, the question at its root is, what does the Democratic Party stand for? That's the root of the question, even though he's not asking it directly. And he's effectively saying, hey, why does the Democrats have a Project 2025? Why don't you have that? Why don't you have this kind of FDR idea of dealing with the vagaries and the problems associated with America that Americans consider to be problematic? I'm going to get your take on this. Listen to head of the Democratic Party for the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries. Listen to what he says here.
Where is the Democrats' Project 2025? Is that underway? Is there, everything you're saying feels right to me. The Democrats have to make this point. Where's the infrastructure to do that? And who are the leaders taking charge of that effort? Because when I listened to, I believe his name is Ken Martin, is that correct? The new DNC chair?
That's right.
He kept saying it's a messaging issue, as though, no, everything's going right, you just don't realize it yet. As opposed to, we've gotten away from New Deal values. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think there's a few things going on here.
Yeah.
In terms of how we better communicate with the American people, Maya Angelou said it best. People won't remember what you say. They may not even remember what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And I think what we have to do a better job of is making the American people feel that we understand the pain that they've been in economically for a long period of time.
What the F?
Thanks. We're still talking about feelings.
We're talking about feelings. He's like, it's about people's feelings. Jon Stewart is talking about concrete stuff. It's like New Deal politics. New Deal politics was FDR acted as if the U.S. was under an alien invasion. And he moved heaven and earth. He was getting struck down by the Supreme Court. He didn't care. In fact, FDR is behaving the way Trump behaved. Where he went in is like, I came in with a mission to deal with the Great Depression. And damn it, that's what I'm going to do.
Correct.
And I need to do, my first 100 days, I'm going to pass Social Security, I'm going to do Medicare, I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to try to deal with the physical reality problems of Americans. He is talking about feelings.
Yep.
I don't know what Jeffries is talking about. Please.
You know what would make them feel better? It's if we improve their lives tangibly.
Yes.
We should just worry about offensive words and feelings, though. This is so the Democrats. Even after they lost the election, they were almost like, we don't know why we lost. They're gone as a party if they don't get it together by the midterms. And Hakeem's answers just tells me that they really still don't get it. Even their reactions to the USAID and the Department of Education, and it's like, we're gonna girl boss and put our videos on Twitter, and it's like, for what? None of this matters. You can't get in. What are you going to do to actually make sure what are you going to do to actually make sure that the USAID thing is a net positive in the end? Nothing. They're just going to sit there and scream. And then when they wind up with nothing, they'll scream forever. They're done as a party. Like, they're done. They're talking about Kamala or Gavin Newsom for 2028. What? They've learned nothing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Why do you think, like, look, I will tell you, in my conversations with Democrats, I found them to be deeply self-righteous. In a bubble, they don't understand why the public dislikes them.
Exactly.
They don't understand why they didn't win. They still think people are just racist, sexist, and bigoted. Yep. And that's the conclusion they come to. So their self-righteousness is ensured and preserved. It is very bizarre. And when I listen to Jeffries, who is leading the Democratic Party, he is literally head of the House of Representatives, a minority leader in the House. And his response to Jon Stewart saying, look, man, maybe you guys have missed the boat. Maybe you need to be focusing on things that are real and tangible in order to get the public back on your side. And Jeffries is like, well, we need to make them feel better.
Yeah, we redirect some. He's like throwing him a softball. What is your plan? Like, what's your 10-year plan for the party? This is something that all Democrat politicians should be able to answer off the top of their head. This is our 5-year plan. This is our 10-year plan. That's a softball question. He goes, yes, we got to focus on making them feel better first. How do you measure that? What's the metric of how they feel? They've kind of I don't want to say DEI, they've sort of identity politicked themselves into a complete hole. That they said, you must be racist or sexist, and that's why you didn't vote for Kamala. We're still doing this. We did this with Hillary. Like, what are we doing here?
Why do you think, like, and maybe you don't know this, why do you think they're missing the boat so much on this? I have my own idea of this. But give me your take. Why, like, you would think that they would have this kind of come to Jesus moment, this reflection of how do we get this so wrong? And they don't seem to be having that reflection of how do we get this so wrong? It's super weird to me. Why do you think they're so off the reservation? And this could be the last question, and we're coming to the end of the show. But I am curious on somebody else's take on this.
The best answer that I could provide was Thomas Frank wrote a book called Listen Liberal. Yes. And it was about the Democratic Party in the 90s. And it's like, when you read that, because you don't really think of it that way, the destruction of the intelligentsia of the Democratic Party, and that sort of shift from actual working class, actual union building, actual people, shifted to what we have now as these weird, moralistic, self-righteous kind of yuppies, these coastal elites, for lack of a better word. They remind me of the mom from Arrested Development. Do you remember her? Who's like, how much could it cost, Michael? It's just a banana, $10. That's the Democrats. Like, they're so out of touch with how we live. But that happened under Clinton. I think this party is done. I think the Republicans, you mentioned FDR. The Republicans are more Democrat than the Democrats. It's very weird how everything's kind of playing out. But I think that this party is done if it doesn't have a complete overhaul.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very bizarre. And they don't seem to be getting the hint.
They should all read Listen Liberal. That was like an eye-opener for me. Thomas Frank is great. If you guys haven't read Thomas Frank, he'll tell you why the Liberal or the Democratic Party ruined itself.
If I remember correctly, Frank made the point that they used to be a union-based party.
Yes.
And somewhere along the way, there was a breakdown between Democrats and unions. And when that breakdown took place, that they started to be more representative of the top 10% of the American public, which leaves out the other 90%. But their thinking is, well, these are doctors and lawyers, and these are the people who we can effectively fight for as a party. I also think there's this other element with Hillary Clinton where Democrats take the same money that Republicans take. In fact, they take more. I mean, they take far more in these presidential elections than Republicans get. And in taking the money, how do you take money like that and then push for this kind of workers' agenda? Like, because the people who you're getting the money from are going to be billionaires, millionaires. They're going to have healthcare, education. They're going to have these kind of basic things that the public is going to want from a lefty party that is supposed to care about those things. Okay, well, how do you, as Kamala Harris, who gets $1.5 billion for many of these people, billionaires, many times over, they don't care about those things. And if they don't care about those things, how can you fight for those things that they don't care for? Like it's almost like they've gotten themselves in this kind of weird box. It's one thing if you're Sanders and you're running with money that you're getting from the public. It's another thing if you are Harris and you're getting money from billionaires, and then you have to come up with a platform that the American public is going to buy into while you're getting money from the same billionaires that don't care about those things. And so they end up with, we believe in identity. You're black, you're white, you're gay, you're straight, you're whatever else. We're going to carve you up into these little identities, and we're going to fight for these identities because that doesn't include wallets.
Nope.
Meaning, if I have to fight for you as a black person, I don't have to deal with the fact that
You're poor.
you're poor.
You need health care. I don't have to
Yeah.
deal with all that. Let's just
Yeah.
right now we got to worry about your feelings. Do you feel okay as a black man? We're here to fix that. After that, we could talk maybe about healthcare.
That's astonishing. That video is astonishing to me. Sarah, thank you for this. Sarah Bills.
you.
By the way, what are you guys hitting as one of your stories that the public is going to be interested in? I know the drawdown is one, but what are the other stories that you guys are hitting?
I have been really excited about USAID, and not from an American perspective, but from the European perspective, and really pulling out these threads that show why things are happening in the way that they are in other countries. You know, people saw what happened in Georgia. Maybe not this time. It didn't work as well, which is another thing that I'm looking into. But they see these color revolutions and, oh, democracy. Look, if people are protesting, they must be out there because they want to be out there and they really hate their government. And I want that sort of narrative to go away. And this USAID thing is something that I'm really, really interested in.
Agreed. The National Endowment for Democracy, apparently it just came out, I think it was either yesterday evening or I'll just say yesterday, that Trump is also killing that. And so you have these kind of regime change mechanisms that go into other countries, and they would say, well, this is purely a natural uprising. And then you pull back the scenes and you're like, oh, all of this money is coming in from all of these like NED or other these NGOs that pushes that stuff. And then it's also interesting, like what they back. Like meaning in USAID or NED would go into a country and it's like, okay, well, what is the angles to which they're backing? What is the media that they're backing? What are they trying to affect in those countries? And fact of the matter is they were trying to take down governments. In Europe also, like in Romania, for example, I would love to see how much USAID was put into Romania in regards to those elections. I would love to see in Georgia, same thing. Ukraine, same thing. Slovakia, same thing. And they, Hungary, same thing. And they all push in one specific direction of liberal governments, as opposed to, let's say, the governments that are on the right. It's fascinating, like the way that they were willing to take down those governments, and Europe just stood by and allowed the governments to be taken down.
For NATO, it's like,
yeah, it's astonishing. Sarah Bills is independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DDGO Politics. Sarah, I always appreciate talking to you. Thank you for this.
so much. You guys have a good weekend. Talk soon.
You too. Be safe. Sarah has to get up very early in the morning to come